Welcome to Puck Talk CS. I'm Matthew Mugno, your host, and I wanted to do a 2024 wrap of our year on the podcast. I got the idea from a self-help podcast I was listening to on my way back driving from Quebec, a trip I took before Christmas. My mom was playing it. It's all about mental health, and all I could think about was how we had so many great special guests this year. We were really fortunate with a lot of the connections in the network we had to have some really great personalities on our show and get some really good insight covering the New York Rangers. For me, it was a fantastic year with ups and downs. I started at the Hockey News in 2023, came into 2024, and decided I wanted to go the broadcasting route and become a play-by-play analyst and commentator. Now, with that, there were ups and downs. I started writing for Blue Line Station. I then found my way to Forever Blue Shirts, and the in-between, I was broadcasting with Army West Point for their lacrosse team, and eventually landed and finally am in a play-by-play seat for hockey, broadcasting for RPI, the famed college team of Game Notes, Spit and Chicklets, Matt Murley, and of course, NHL legend Adam Oates. So in terms of hockey, I've been blessed with the year that I've had. I know I could speak for Steve as well with saying we had some great special guests. Now, featured in this episode is commentary from Steve Ellis, Jonny Lazarus, Arthur Staple, Greg Wyshinski, and a few other names in there that cover not only the New York Rangers, but the rest of the NHL. And I'd like to start with a great clip. All these are clips, by the way. None of these are entire length episodes. I'd really encourage you to check those out because these people are the best at what they do. But for this episode, I clipped the best answers, responses, conversations we had with these guests. And the first is with Dave Alter, who writes for the Hockey News Toronto Maple Leafs site, since that's been picked up by Sports Illustrated. And Dave talks about his experience at Madison Square Garden. This is a man that has been in the journalism world for a long time. He's bounced around a little bit. He even said on the podcast that he was almost the Vegas Golden Knights reporter. He remained in Toronto, and with a lot of what's gone on with the Maple Leafs the last few years, he's been really found a way and cut out his area in a crowded market. The Maple Leafs locker room is like the New York Yankees of baseball. You name the top program, the top organization in the sport you like, and that's what the Maple Leafs is comparable to. Very difficult to cut out a role there, and he's found a way to keep his website the number one in the Hockey News team sites. Now, Dave talks about his experience, as I just mentioned, at Madison Square Garden, and I thought it was a great clip and encouraging for Ranger fans to know. I know right now they're losing, but to remember what the building means and what the price of a ticket gets you at Madison Square Garden. So here's Dave with that commentary.
Side of that, any game I go to at Madison Square Garden, I call that building the Mecca because it just is. Like, I love the history of that building. I love everything about it, just being there. I like how that the ice surface isn't on the ground floor, that it's on the 5th floor above Penn Station, and like all the other weird quirks and stuff that come with that building. Like, just even from the alignment. I remember my first time there was the first year of the big reno that they did in 2011.
Okay, with the bridge.
So like, it looked very different. We were sitting up in the 100 level because they didn't have that big 10th floor press box built up yet. And then like in year 2, they had us in like the back corner because it was like a little box because they were still building that catwalk upstairs. So like just seeing that kind of dig, and like it's just such an iconic location, just being where it is. And everything historically that's been there, like growing up, being a fan of a lot of different sports, I can point to other things that have happened in that building. That is just, it's really awesome. So yeah, Leaf experience in Toronto, it's great. The fans are very passionate, but because it's Toronto, because it's such a high price ticket and everything else that comes with it, I just don't get the same sort of home passion that I do whenever I'm at a New York event, whether it's in New York or even on the island, like the day before at UBS. Like, the Islanders fan base is pretty damn passionate too. So that's
that game.
Yeah. Oh, yes, especially in that game. Like, there's just I don't know. It's so different, and that's what I love about New York. I always tell people when I'm in New York, I'm in my spiritual home because there's just so much I love about it. There's just so much I love about the city.
Great commentary from Dave, and I'd like to swing now to Patrick Williams, who's covered the beat not only for the NHL, but he covers the AHL heavily. And Patrick Williams came on early last year and gave really great insight. I mean, it was hard to find a clip from start to finish of something information-wise that he was telling us, because the entire episode was things I never knew before. The AHL, I think, is, for lack of better words, almost an ugly stepchild. It's in between the ECHL, the leagues where players are drafted, college hockey, and of course the National League. So it's not talked about a lot, but he gave great insight about developing players, developing organizations, and where the Wolfpack has come from, because for years the Wolfpack was a extension of the New York Rangers club that wasn't getting a lot of attention. And now it's really bolstered up, and you're seeing that in the NHL talent that's coming through, specifically with players like Will Coli, Brett Berard, Zach Jones, even for the stints that Igor Shesterkin, Philip Hedl, Ryan Lindgren played down at the AHL level. And he talks in depth about this. This is one of the longer clips on this episode, so hang in there. It's like a steak, green beans, potato, perfect meal. Enjoy this one from Patrick Williams. With that, there's probably less consistency from season to season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Last season, the Hartford Wolfpack, right? We saw, I think a lot of hockey fans got into AHL action because of some of the intense games that were happening in the playoffs. Hartford made it 3 rounds. What has elevated the success of the club overall?
I mean, for one, they're bringing in better talent. Like people will overlook, like, okay, Riley Nash, right? They'll look, okay, he's 34. He's, guy that's kind of like been around, but he's played like, I think almost 500, 600 NHL games. So that's a great resource if you're a young player to learn from, right? Like a guy that's been there, he's done that. He was a top prospect at one point himself. And he can also go out and get you 15, 20 goals, right? Like he can win you some games as well. So, so when you're bringing in, let's say, like an Adam Sikora, right? Or Brennan Othman, go those guys, like, all right, if they don't have anybody to learn from, right? Like, then it's kind of like, they're trying to lead themselves. And I've seen that with other teams, and it just doesn't work. Like, you need some older guys to really help them. So that's been the first thing. So like, they're just a more competitive group. And I think they're finally starting to draft better too. Like, like it's always kind of a chicken and the egg thing with draft and develop. It's like, well, is the development system not working, or are we just putting, weak draft picks in there? Like, and usually it's somewhere, some combination of the two, like, and that, like, the trick is to kind of figure out how much of it, of each, but yeah, it's a challenge. I think they are starting to draft better. So that's the first thing. You're putting good talent into the system. And then once that talent's in the system, now you're starting to put some good, supporting cast around them to help those young players grow.
I think something that fans are always curious about is how those top prospects are doing and how they're transitioning. So at the AHL level, what goes into the moment they're drafted, put on the jersey and walk on the stage, they're placed in the AHL. For Alexi Lafreniere and Capo Caco, a lot of the complaints were that they weren't developed in the AHL.
Yeah.
What goes into this is a very broad stroke of the brush, but what are some of the aspects that go into developing top prospects at the American League level?
Well, I think sometimes it comes down like, the organizational philosophy, number one. Number two, the sort of the outside pressures, like, all right, like, so you get like, someone like, Kako, and like, there's a lot of pressure to put him right in the lineup, right? Like you used to, super high draft pick on him, right? Like, it's tough to the message then, okay, we're sending him to the AHL, right? Like, like there's been so much hype. Now, you look at what other teams have done though. Like, you look at New Jersey, for example, like Shimon Nemitz, he played, a year and, plus in the AHL, Seattle, Shane Wright, who was at one point considered, likely first overall pick. He's in Coachella Valley. He's been there most of the season. Like, he played part of last season there. So it really I think sometimes comes down to what the need is at the NHL level. Like, hey, do we need somebody we can plug in the lineup right now, or do we have a little bit of time? But there is a challenge there just in terms of if you can wait and get them, like Buffalo, for example, is very patient. And that was always the knock against them up until a couple of years ago, was they rushed their prospects. And now, the last few years, they've really taken their time. JJ Peterka, Jack Quinn, Coli, Rosine, like those guys have all gotten a good amount of time now in Rochester to kind of really learn their pro game. Because most of the time these guys can come in and, offensively they're able to hold their own at the AHL level. But it's a lot of, you'll hear this phrase a lot from coaches, like, we have to coach the junior out of the player. Okay. A lot of these guys in junior got away with some things just because they had so much more talent than everybody around them. Mm-hmm. And so now they're coming in, and you're coming to the pro game, everyone's got talent. And so now you got to you got to figure out some other things in your game where maybe on a given night, maybe you're not going offensively, but can you bring something else to the lineup? Can you go out there and win a faceoff late in the game? Can you go kill a penalty? Can you, shut down, the opposing team's top line? That's the thing kind of where that's where the AHL really comes in, and players start to really learn that part of the game as well.
Brennan Othman, after one of the first preseason games, said that almost exact quote. He said, "The coaches are trying to help me get out of those junior habits." Mm-hmm. And it's funny because that just rung, for all the reporters, it was something that over time I really wanted to learn more about the AHL level, because I thought mm-hmm. to myself, what goes into all of that? With that stated, how are the younger prospects for the Rangers in the American League developing? You have Brennan Othman, Sikora, who's now the captain of a World Juniors team, mm-hmm. Brett Berard, who seems like he could be a depth guy in the future for the team. How are those players performing at the American League level?
I think, kind of taken as a whole, pretty well. Hartford overall is, they've had some ups and downs, but all things considered, considering the coaching change, a month in the year, pretty well. I think if you're the Rangers and you're kind of looking across the board there, Berard, I'd be pretty happy with him, seeing, what he's been doing so far. A guy coming in, and, I don't think people knew a ton about him just in terms of how he would kind of translate to the pro level, but he's holding his own. Othman certainly, he kind of plays with that edge. It's he's brought that into the pro game, and sometimes guys get away from also what's made them successful. Sometimes they go too much the other way, trying to reinvent themselves. So it's a line that young prospects have to walk. You want to do what's always made you successful, but you also want to add something to your game too. And mm-hmm. So I think that's what he's trying to do there in Hartford, and kind of round out his game. And Sikora, a guy that's I would have loved to have seen Sikora come over and play junior last year just to mm-hmm. kind of get a little bit more familiarity. But that's said and done. So yeah, he's in Hartford. He's been impressive at different points. So I just overall, I like kind of what they have going on in Hartford right now. They're competitive every night. They work hard. They're pretty well structured. I think that bodes well. And if you can get these guys into the playoffs, it's fantastic hockey, right? You're getting guys. I've had players that playing both NHL, AHL. He said it's the closest thing you're going to get to the NHL is mm-hmm. the Calder Cup playoffs. You're not getting anything closer, so it's the next best thing. And if you can get those guys, to get, maybe, you think about it, you can get, 10, 20 games of high level competition if you really go far in the playoffs. So, mm-hmm. So I think it's great. I think, Hartford at least is just competitive now. That's the thing, because for years they were just bad. Every year they were kind of the bottom 5 in the league, and they were kind of neither winning nor developing. So you're kind of well, what are you doing here, right? Mm-hmm. You should be doing, ideally you're doing both. Maybe you're doing one or the other, but like they were doing none of it. So, like now at least, okay, now you have some prospects in there. And at some point, I think that's when the veterans will hand over some of that responsibility to the younger guys. Now we're kind of getting into almost the second half of the year. That's where you want to see them start to, take on more responsibility, take on heavier minutes, that sort of thing. And then, March, April, it's kind of the young guys team, and they can kind of, carry that team in the playoffs.
Up next, we have Steve Ellis, and I wanted to stick on the train of development and the recruiting process because Steve Ellis has become a master in the field and in that area of not only reporting but being now on live shows. He was just on Jeff Merrick's The Sheet covering the World Juniors, and he's had a lot of spots because of that. I got him onto the show last year around that time to talk specifically about Gabriel Perreault and Brennan Othman. Check out the full episode for that information because I still think it's very relevant to where those two players are right now in their development as young players. But Steve went into his favorite prospect, and I'm also going to conjoin this with the clip on NCAA ice hockey because with CHL eligibility coming into play with college hockey, that's going to completely change the landscape. This interview is from last January of 2023. So Steve talks about Lafreniere, and all the points he makes are still relevant. And it was his favorite prospect to cover in the QMJ IHL. And he also talks about NCAA ice hockey because I wanted his opinion from someone that covers all of these leagues, all these development leagues. Where does the NCAA fit in with the CHL? And luckily we got a great conversation going from there. I want to turn this over to the top editor for Daily Faceoff and prospect reporter in Steve Ellis. And keep an eye on his name for this World Junior season, folks. He is a master at the craft. I follow along, and that's where I get all of my recruiting information, and that's where I get all of my NHL prospect information from Steve. Here he is.
There's a few really good ones. Obviously, I was so happy when Shesterkin finally came over, watching what he was able to do over in Russia. But I'm going to go Lafreniere. I think just the way that he dominated the Q was impressive, and World Junior tournament for him was great. I'm glad it's finally starting to work out. Obviously, I still want a bit more from him, but if you can get a 50-point season, that'd be so big for his confidence. If you can get, you hope for more, and you hope he can continue to, he's still young. I think, what's he, 22 or something like that? I think people forget how young of a player he still is. But he's a guy that, didn't become a top prospect by accident either. I think the way he was able to dominate was so important. And a lot of other players did get the opportunity to play, or like for him, compared to other first overall picks, and why I think a lot of people focus in on him. I think some people forget that he had 8 months between games. He should have been the World Juniors the year before, or when he was still eligible to do it. He should have. It's too bad that COVID kind of cut his ability to play, because he's a great prospect that was looking good, and the momentum was starting to build up, and then everything was shut down, and he goes 8 months between games, and his first game back is his NHL debut. That's not easy for anybody. No one is going to have to probably ever do that ever again. So I wish that that didn't kind of work out the way it was, but I'm still a believer in him. He's still young. It's only a matter of time till he's hitting 50 points every single year, and maybe we're talking, maybe he becomes 60, 70-point guy. I'm not sure if we're going to get to that point, but as he gets more confident, the Rangers coaching staff continues to believe more in him, I think he's going to continue going higher.
College hockey or the major juniors in Canada, or alternate routes, really?
Yeah, I think the thing about college is that it just shows that for college hockey to work, the feeder levels also have to be good. And the USHL is way better than it used to be. The BCHL is becoming a league a lot of people are turning to. The AJHL, they get a lot of good talent there. So I think be proving that all these other levels to get to there. It's not just that you're sacrificing 2 years to play lower level hockey than if you were playing major junior. I think that's a good thing because, you look at the U.S. national development team and how many of those guys go to college, and it's because they typically take the best of the best players available, and it shows in how good their team is every single year. But, what about these other guys like the Trevor Connollys, the Max Swansons, these guys that are out there trying to show that, there could be very valuable players one day. Well, they have to have the belief that the USHL is the route to go, and then that will lead them into college, and that's proven that that's a really good pathway. So, college hockey continues to be a better way. Like if you're not if I like the idea where you'll see sometimes that 18-year-old guys that will just turn to major junior, and it's like, well, you could have waited one more year and gone to college and maybe see what happened there. And with college, that buys you a bit of extra time. Sure, you're not getting all the same game reps and the schedule feels a little shorter, but being able to play in those high pressure moments and in packed barns and doing it against older players is very valuable. So Quinnipiac, watching them do that run last year was pretty fun. This year, they're good again this year. Boston College, Boston University, the two teams everyone's watching, and that should be a lot of fun. But college hockey continues to get better. It continues to. I wish I live closer to NCAA teams. I live right outside of Toronto. The closest one we got is the university, we got Niagara, which is fine, but that's not exactly a high level team. I did get to see University of Michigan play for the very first time in person. It was against the US U18 team. They crushed them. I think like 5-1 was the final score, and they didn't even have all their guys from the World Junior team back. So college hockey's
Up next is a combination of 3 short clips from Greg Wyshinski of ESPN, Colin Stephenson, and Arthur Staple. Greg and I had the chance to sit next to each other a lot when I was covering the New York Rangers for the Hockey News. He was the seat next to me. So I got a lot of insight from someone that's been, in the business for a long time and is a really entertaining and funny reporter on a personal level, and fantastic. I mean, he's leading the way on ESPN's site alongside the people like Emily Kaplan, Kevin Weeks. So Greg had some great information about the New York Rangers as a whole. Now, I want to also give the shout out to Colin Stephenson. He had kids around my age, so he always took me under his wing when I was at the rink. And Arthur Staple was the same way. For someone that he obviously writes for The Athletic, Colin Newsday, so more of a regional paper. For Arthur, The Athletic, I had the chance to have conversations with someone that has really been in the New York market for a really long time and is nationally known, but for the regional coverage. He has a lot of connections, and his network is vast. And Arthur was always very nice to me, and I always appreciated that at the rink. Just in conversation on press row and at the practice facility, he was another person that was really good to me and took me under his wing. So I really appreciated that. Wanted to give them all 3 of those guys that shout out, but they did a great job of summarizing the New York Rangers team. Colin touches us upon Igor Shesterkin. This is before his contract, still a relevant conversation. Arthur and Greg touch more upon the New York Rangers construct as a whole, and I think with the way the team is going right now, it's an extremely relevant soundbite. So I'm really excited to share these. Check them out, and if you get the chance, check out those full interviews as well.
And I recall asking you, if this Rangers team, like, what do they need? And you had previously stated at that point, preseason, that you didn't believe they had the speed in their game, even just within their DNA,
right,
to reach that level. Do you think they still need that in order to compete for the Stanley Cup this year?
Well, I think, like I said to you, like, they can't change who they are, right? Like the players that they have are the players that they have, and I think inherently, when push comes to shove, you have teams in this conference and in this league that are simply have faster players than the Rangers. Now, what the Rangers have been able to do this season that I don't think a lot of us anticipated was playing faster. They're quicker with the puck. They're quicker with their decisions. I think it was really smart of Peter Laviolette to kind of identify that and understand that, while you can't make some of these guys faster than what they are, you can increase the tempo with which they play. And I think that's been a nice solution to that problem. And maybe Maybe that changes in the playoffs when other teams can kind of dictate the pace a little bit differently. Who knows? But for now, it's been a pretty handy fix to what is fundamentally a roster construction problem for this team.
Or is the one that sets the Rangers apart from most of the other contenders. I don't know that the other contenders have a goalie that is equal to Igor. Certainly Vegas doesn't. Colorado, we know, doesn't, right? I mean, I like Alex Georgiev, and I think he's a very fine goaltender, but obviously the Rangers chose Shesterkin over him. Boston, I don't think does. Carolina, we know, doesn't, right? So Florida is probably the only team out there right now. Tampa Bay has a great goalie, but he's not having a great year, and their team's not necessarily as good as it was. Florida is the only team that, seems like it's a really legit super contender that is getting the kind of play in the goal that Igor can deliver, and Sergei Bobrovsky. So, I think Igor gives them a chance to win in any given year. And you look at how old Igor is now. What is he, 27? So, how many more years can he be at this level? Another 3 or 4 years. So that's kind of maybe more. I don't know how many years, but however long he's going to be at this level is however long your window is open, as far as I'm concerned. And so, if you had a chance to do it now and go for it now, I would have done it. But again, Chris Drury has to look at, he does have to look at next year and the year after. And, in his mind, the price was too high for some of these other guys. And, he just wasn't willing to do it. And so I think their team's good. And, this is who they ride with.
It's been a struggle. And, I think you look back maybe to those middle 2 months of the season, November, December, January, where they were a 500 team. I think the reason they were a 500 team was they weren't outscoring their problems like they've been doing the last few months. And they weren't getting the goaltending that they needed. Jonathan Quick was good, but not good enough. And Shesterkin was struggling a little bit then. So they have the goalies to erase some of these issues at 5-on-5. But if they're not getting the saves, which is what we saw happen in the playoffs last year, then things start to break down. I'm curious to see. Peter Laviolette is a very detail-oriented guy. He's got a great staff. Dan Muse, Michael Pekka, Phil Housley, especially. I think Muse and Pekka have been really helpful as guys who haven't worked a ton with Laviolette and haven't been with many other teams. Pekka's first time in the NHL as an assistant. So I think they have this coaching staff to make those adjustments if things start to crumble a little bit. But it is a little worrisome to see that they've kind of bobbed along at that, at the bottom of the league, defending off the rush at 5-on-5.
One of the most interesting conversations we had all year was with Dan DeUva. He is the radio play-by-play for the Vegas Golden Knights. So an organization that's been around for less than a decade, has won a Stanley Cup. This is their radio play-by-play. So not only, likely down the road, something that we'll talk about historically, but someone that's from New Jersey. And that's something that we shared that connection. I'm now in the broadcasting world as well. So we have that connection. Got to meet him at MSG as well when Vegas was in town. And that's how I got him on the show. Dan gave really, really great insight on the Vegas Golden Knights organization. I think because it's so new, not that it's guarded, but this information, these walls can talk kind of information you don't often hear from Vegas because there's a lot of glitz, a lot of glam, and a lot of, they're obviously a contending team all the time. So those smaller details, I don't think, not that people don't care, but they're not as talked about. Like Original Six, you find out a fun fact every now and then about a player, about, this crazy event or this one time that you don't always hear about with Vegas. So I thought this was really interesting. He talked about George McPhee and how his West Point influence is very heavy with how he runs the organization. But what he also talked about was the DNA of Vegas and how the misfit mentality has completely changed, not necessarily changed, but began what has been a contending window to start the Vegas club since its expansion. And he also talked about how important team is. And I think right now for the Rangers fans that have doubts I think this is a great conversation we had with Dan, not only about, maybe a positive change for the Rangers in the future this year, but also just in general, if they don't learn from this, how important that team and how important every player is on the roster. And that's how the organization in Vegas looks at it. So here's a toss to Dan, a great conversation, and someone I admire in the broadcasting world.
I love that. Actually, to build off that, is the vibe the same? I think a lot of fans are curious to know, and I'm curious myself. Is the vibe the same as the first year you were there?
I don't think it'll ever be the same.
Okay.
But I think that a lot of folks felt with Bruce Cassidy being in his first year with the Knights, there was a refresh that obviously the Knights as an organization thought was needed. And Bruce Cassidy had been to the finals and lost. They lost to St. Louis in Boston in 2019 to Pietrangelo and Barbashev. So Bruce Cassidy was looking for that fresh start. I remember, and I spent a lot of the summer in Cape Cod in Massachusetts, so I know a lot of Boston fans. And fans were so upset, they thought they should have changed the general manager, not the coach. But Bruce Cassidy, who had grown up a Bruins fan in Ottawa, he's in that same mode, that misfit mentality. They didn't want me? Fine, I'll go win a championship elsewhere. And he did. So I think that there was a feeling around the organization. There was a refresh there and a back to the mentality of, and I think that this was put really well by John Stevens, who, been part of the Kings run, Flyers coach, et cetera, just a great defensive coach. John Stevens has said, and I think it's a great way to sum everything up for a guy who understands that mentality, but is now coming from the outside in. On the Golden Knights roster, everyone feels important. You've got your stars. You've got Conn Smythe winners. You've got original misfits. You've got new arrivals. Everyone feels important. I'm not sure that other teams in the NHL can say that. I mean, with no disrespect to guys who play for the Edmonton Oilers. Do you feel as important as Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl if you're there? I don't know. Maybe they've figured something out with a new coach, and they've had this great winning streak. But I think that goes back to your original question, Matthew, about the identity of the team, and it's got to be a group. There's that common bond where you were cast off by somebody else, but everyone does feel important, and I think Bruce Cassidy has helped instill that to get the most out of players. And I remember saying this a lot about John Cooper, who I mentioned earlier, had been in Syracuse, and look at all the success he's had with that organization in Tampa. He knows how to push people's buttons. Today, Matthew might need a pat on the back. Steve, you might need a kick in the rear end. But tomorrow could be the other way around, right? John Cooper has those relationships with guys where he knows how to get the most out of them. It doesn't mean they're best friends. It doesn't mean that you've got to be buddy-buddy with everybody and stroke their egos. But it does mean that you know how to get the most out of a guy and help him grow as a player and as a person. And that's the neat thing. Jack Eichel and Bruce Cassidy, both, Jack had already been with Vegas, but was coming off the injury and hadn't really had a full season of preparation and training before he came in last year with Bruce Cassidy. So they kind of shared that. They talked about that. And Bruce has talked about how, he said to Jack that summer before Bruce took the reins with Vegas, we're going to be lumped together. Let's figure it out. And boy, Jack has become, I think, a Selke candidate because now he's on the penalty kill. He is right there among the league leaders in takeaways. That was not Jack Eichel with the Buffalo Sabres. That's a direct result of Bruce Cassidy. And again, everyone feels important. Everybody's got to contribute. The stars are not up here. Everybody else is down here. Everybody's part of it. And to your question, I think that's just such a big part of what has made this team go. And that's something that if they can keep it up, they are still in this window where they should be competitive this year and going forward.
Great insights from Dan on team and the mentality of how important every player is to a team, especially in a successful organization like the Vegas Golden Knights, who won the Stanley Cup just a few years back. All right, next up is Jonny Lazarus. This is someone I owe a lot to. This is someone who's acted like a mentor to me in both broadcasting and the reporting world. Obviously blown up, but I had him on Puck Talk in 2022. And this was just at the precipice of where he started to gain more national traction, and he worked as a host for NHL that spring, and then things really took off for him, and I couldn't be prouder. I had the chance to work with Jonny for 4 months writing for the Hockey News. He moved to Daily Faceoff. I've moved on as well. But in the Ranger world, it was fantastic to be mentored by someone a few years older than me that had gone through the experiences of success and failures as well earlier in your career. And I wouldn't trade in those few months for the world. I really enjoyed my time working with him. And he gave some great insight recently on our show about the player's mentality. And this was in response to a question about how does a hockey player and a person deal with that mental health and adversity when they're struggling, not only to produce, but overall. And Jonny gave a really great response on mental health, and he opened up about his own story, and I really admired it. So of the hockey conversation we had, great, but I think the mental health factor that we talked about was the most important and one of the best clips from the year on our show. So to not only a good friend, a great reporter, and someone everyone can root for, here's a mental health snippet from Jonny and an insight on how players can deal with that struggle and overcome mental health struggles on the ice and off the ice for that matter. Like we know, Jonny, weren't in the NHL, but you did play at a high level. And I wanted to know what you did to deal with the mental side of the game when you struggled. I mean, obviously it's it's just the way you dealt with it, maybe not everybody, but I think I want to provide a little more insight to our listeners for what does Mika Zibanejad go through, right? Like when you're mentally struggling.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to speak for Mika, obviously, just because, we don't know. But, for me, I was a total fucking disaster. I was seeing a sports psychiatrist. I was doing it all to just try to get out of the funk. Like my junior year, I was fully depressed. Called my parents, and this was I had transitioned from UMass to Mercier, so new school, had to redshirt. Wasn't really loving the game. Did not love going to the rink. The rink was actually the last place I wanted to be, and that's hard. At UMass and earlier in my life, I was one of the first guys on the ice for practice, one of the last guys off. I think at Mercier, I was one of the last guys on, first guy off. I just fully did not want to be there. And, it's tough to get out of that. Obviously in life, even when things are good, you feel like they're never going to, when things are bad, you never think they're going to be good again. And when things are good, you never think they're going to go wrong. And, full transparency, I got nothing to hide. My junior year, New Year's Eve, left our team New Year's Eve party early, called my parents fully crying, freaking out, wanting to go home and quit hockey. I was just for whatever reason, I just wasn't in a good mental place, and it affected not only my play on ice, but my life off of it. I wasn't really enjoying my social life and constantly beating myself up. I'd spend a Saturday night just kind of staying in my apartment and not going out and enjoying myself. And, I think that's just how being competitive and how playing sports at a high level sometimes works, but it's never really easy to talk about, right? Even my roommates at Mercier never really knew what I was going through until 2 years after we graduated. I told them how much I really hated it. But again, I'm not sitting here saying I have any regrets. I'm very thankful that Mercier took me in and gave me a second chance and all that stuff. But when it comes to playing hockey and things aren't going your way on the ice, it really just affects your everyday life off the rink. And it's something that I feel because players make a lot of money, they're told to just kind of put it to the side. I was pretty good at masking it. I feel when I was around my teammates and no one would have known, but it's tough. And I feel I'm rambling right now, but I think you have to love the game to perform, right? You have to. And That's why I think you're seeing it be more normalized now that players will take a leave of absence, like JT Miller just did yesterday. And no one really knows the reasons why, but I think it came out, it was like a mental reset, and sometimes those are important. I'll never forget, like, when I just truly shifted the mentality my senior year of, this is going to be my last year of playing hockey, and like nothing really matters, just like have fun with it. It's almost crazy to think about, when you care less, you do better. Like, I was just an idiot out there senior year. Like, I would, chirp my goalies in practice, like just try to make myself have fun, trick my brain into thinking I'm having fun. And it worked. And I think that's something that, every athlete battles at some point. And, if I'm going through it, just talk about it as much as you can. And I don't know, I kind of got lost there. I haven't really talked about that era in a while, but yeah, it sucks. It's tough.
Lastly, we have Steve Levy, ESPN desk host. You'll see him all playoffs long for the ESPN series when they have their night for NHL playoff hockey. Steve Levy, obviously a monstrous presence in the industry, and just a guy that will get you to belly laugh the entire time. That's all Steve and I did when we interviewed him. Now, Steve, we talked a lot, and I wanted to include the clip of the player that he thinks will be the next Ranger in the rafters. That one circulated well on the internet and started a lot of conversation with Ranger fans that follow us. But the big conversation I wanted to shed light on, I think it's the best one we've had, was his relationship with the captain, Mark Messier, and Ryan Callahan, two former New York Rangers, and where they're at in their careers as broadcasters, post-hockey, what it means in the broadcasting world to work with analysts that are superstar personalities, but also some insight as to how Mark Messier and Ryan Callahan became broadcasters, because the process isn't as seamless as it seems. So to Steve Levy, I thought that episode was our best of the year. He was a fantastic interview, and his insights, our conversations were great. Tossing it off to our last guest, and I think the best clip of our year, Steve Levy opening up about Mark Messier, Ryan Callahan, and giving us a little peek in the curtain in the broadcasting world, something that you don't often get. I'm going to chalk up one last one. Any funny stories with Mark Messier or Ryan Callahan, two former Ranger captains?
So they're both great dudes. Callahan probably doesn't get enough credit, right, for being the player that he was, and where the Ranger captaincy then goes to Tampa Bay and has a great second career there. And I think when he walks in, he sort of takes a step back because he's Messier, right? Now, they both wore the same sweater. Mm-hmm. They both wore the same letter on that same prestigious sweater. But I think there's an aura about Mark Messier, right? When Mess walks in a room, when Mess says anything on TV, like I think got a lot of Rangers fans' attention the other day in the pregame, before the game even started. He said the key to the Rangers' success would be they got to get their asses off the boards and go to the middle of the ice, because that, I was like, whoa, hey, whoa. And so that got a lot of attention. He also talked about one of the Rangers got boarded by Tom Wilson, about putting yourself in a bad position. Like if I did that to myself, I would have never played 20 years in the NHL. You got to be aware, A, of any player, but B, Tom Wilson's out there. You see him coming. Why would you ever turn your back to him? So I'm saying is, so the weight of Messier's words, I think it carries so much in the NHL because of who he is, much like Wayne Gretzky, quite frankly. And so both have been a pleasure to work with. Both have great careers ahead of them in broadcasting, if they want to do it. And it's been a lot of fun. And again, growing up as a Ranger fan, now again, I'm older than Callahan and maybe a couple years younger than Messier. So it's not like I grew up watching them, but certainly not Callahan. But I was a kid watching Messier too. And in 90, I only got to ESPN in 93. So 94 was a year later, less than a year from my time at ESPN. But it's been a pleasure. And I'm not too proud to admit, like, you know, I compartmentalize in my brain. Okay, Mark Messier, he's my colleague. He's kind of my buddy, my friend. We'll text and all that stuff, and we'll go out for dinner and have drinks and all that, which is kind of cool. And then sometimes I do slip back into fan mode a little bit. And, you know, Mess watches unbelievable amount of hockey. Like 2 a.m, we'll text about a West Coast game. And I might just text my buddies, hey, you can't believe you just texted me a hockey thing at 2 a.m. Mark Messier is texting me about hockey. And that's really cool, right? So then I try to not put my fan hat on too often. And hey, he's a colleague. He's an ESPN employee, just like me. But it's a little bit different. And so that's one of the fun, cool things about the job. And I just like to see, and I close with this, but so it's really cool for me, who has spent an entire career trying to get good at this broadcasting, sportscasting thing, to see retired athletes or managers in whatever sport they are, who played at the top of their level in those games, again, whatever sport, they come into the broadcasting world, and I guarantee you they think it's going to be easy. You know, when they're playing or coaching or managing, they're saying, look at those guys up in the booth. They just show up, put a headset on, and start talking. Now, us three, we know that's not the case. But then these players and athletes come over, and they try to do what we do, and they're blown away. And they're nervous. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine them being nervous? They play in front of 75,000 people, whatever it is, a football stadium, baseball, hockey, whatever it is. And so I always appreciate that. And it gives me great comfort in knowing, hey, you know what? Maybe we have some skill on our end too. Maybe there is a talent our work ethic shows too. And the best example, it wasn't last year, it was 2 years ago. Mess and Chelly and I did a broadcast in Vegas. Maybe it was the Bruins against the Golden Knights. We put the headsets on. Now, these guys have never broadcast a game, right? You can imagine how many games they watched. We know how many games they played in. They've never broadcast a game. And at the end of the first period, they take the headset off, and they both look at me like they were shot out of a cannon, like they had parachuted into a foreign country that they had never seen. And I was just laughing my ass off. Like, they were like, whoa, you know? Like, it was a real adjustment period. And I think they're still tweaking it. You know, they get better every year, as everybody does in every job, in every line of work. So that makes me feel good about the business that the three of us have chosen, the sport that we're around. And look, I got really young kids. You know, I just told you they had a snow day today. You know, I got twin boys who are 11 years old. I started late in life, so I got to keep working for a few more years. And I'm hoping ESPN will keep me around.
I look forward to more conversations with great personalities in 2025. We had a really great year in 2024 here on Puck Talk CS, with insights from the hockey news that I was getting on the day-to-day, whether that was from the professional relationships I built with Capo Caco, Brendan Othman, Zach Jones, Alexi Lafreniere, Keandre Miller, Artemi Panarin, Vincent Trocheck, you know, those players that I got to interview every day. And the reporters that took me under their wing and watched out for me, Molly Walker, Vince Mercogliano, Colin Stevenson, Arthur Staple, and the New York Rangers PR, they were great with me as well. To Blue Line Station, giving me more than one opportunity to write for their site, Forever Blue Shirts and Jim Cerny for allowing me to come on board and provide content for them. Of course, for all the people in the hockey world that have continued to support me, from Quinnipiac, Q30 TV, QBSN, and now with RPI, Army Athletics. Those two programs have launched my professional broadcasting career. And for Steve and I, our playoff run this year in 2024, I know the fans don't want to keep harping away on what's been the past, but that was a great way to connect with everyone. And our spring was phenomenal, even through the summer, talking about free agency. So we had a great year. I had a great year professionally, great year on the podcast, and a lot of fun. So I'm hoping to get some more A-list guests on, and that's a goal of ours for next year, 2025, as well as some more live programming. So for that matter, 2024, wrap it up. And even this year, on a personal note, I also lost my grandfather, who really launched my interest in hockey. So really tying a bow on everything. He got to see me cover the New York Rangers, the team he watched since he was a young lad. He was born the same year as the Curse, so he was 54 when the Rangers finally won in 94. And hopefully for a Stanley Cup in the future. We'll see what this season brings and if the Rangers can stay in the playoff hunt for the rest of the year. Thanks for joining, folks. I really appreciate for those who listen and continue to support Steve and I. And I hope you enjoyed these clips because this year was a phenomenal one for our podcast as we enter our 8th year on the show. Thanks for joining, everyone, and enjoy a happy and healthy new year.